Now that Clemson's hands are on the ACC's contract with ESPN, things don't look great. I think the key to the Big 12 expanding is grabbing ACC teams like North Carolina. How about a crossover? Locked on Big 12, locked on Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Tar Heels crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That's Isaac Shade, my favorite man who talks about North Carolina but lives in Joplin, Missouri. Isaac, the ACC. Hey, by the way, thanks for making this show and that show your first listen every single day. The ACC was already in rough water, right? 3 different entities suing them. And my conversations I've been having typically on Locked On Big 12 are how do we as a conference facilitate growth? How can we stay alive in an ever-growing gap between the Big 12, ACC, Big 10, SEC? And my whole take is North Carolina, Miami, Virginia. Those big brands are going to be the key to keeping the Big 12 alive. But the reason this conversation's ramped up now is Clemson can view the ESPN contract that the ACC has, but not share it with it. Let's just start there. What's going on with Clemson?
Yeah. So Drake, great to be together. First off, you're such a party animal. I love it. So from the AP report on this, which came out, this all happened on Friday. So it's been a weekend and now we can digest it. Drake, I just want to briefly read a couple short paragraphs because it is that kind of legally kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So basically what happened is Clemson requested from the ACC an unredacted version of their agreement with ESPN so that they could see what is it that this grant of rights actually has in it in totality. Yeah. So there's an interim confidentiality order that this court from the state of South Carolina released on Friday. It says that, quote, the ACC has 7 days to produce unredacted documents about its TV deal with ESPN to Clemson. And that's critical. Not anyone else in the ACC, not anyone else in any other conference, only Clemson. And the order also provides safeguards to keep the requested documents from being released publicly. So keep in mind, here's the deal, Drake and folks. Clemson is a public university, not a private university, So folks could submit with a Freedom of Information Act to get documents, but not in this case, because again, quote, the order bars Clemson, a public university, from complying with any Freedom of Information Act requests unless the ACC gives written permission or the school is forced to do so by another court with, quote, competent jurisdiction. I love that phrase, competent jurisdiction. So basically saying Clemson can't let anyone else see this for fear of all sorts of crazy legal action, even if there's a Freedom of Information Act request made, they can't do it. And the only thing that would supersede that is if another court with competent jurisdiction ruled otherwise. Translation, Clemson's eyes only.
So Clemson can see Oz, but none of us get a glimpse or an idea of what Clemson saw.
That's right.
In essence, what I pick out from this is, so it's Monday today. Over the weekend, I decided to go out and sit by the beach and tan, and that tan is just a sunburn. I'm just red everywhere. I thought I was having a bad weekend. I think Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, is probably having a worse weekend than suntanned host of podcast. With that being said, North Carolina, too, is one of the Magnificent Seven. Those first 7 really explore the idea of where the ACC's contract with ESPN and even its contract with its teams was. Is there a feeling that North Carolina is looking at a contingency plan now as things get rockier and rockier with the conference?
I think they have been all along, especially, as you said, part of that Mag 7, Drake. They were trying to get out ahead of this thing. And so I think, as you would be foolish not to do, they're looking at every possible contingency plan, whether it's Big 12, Big 10, SEC, anywhere else, starting a new conference. I don't know, whatever the possibilities may be. They, as any other school in their right mind, is pursuing any possibility.
With that, I've heard a lot of people talk about how North Carolina is selling out for the Big Ten, that's where the school feels as though it could be best utilized. And one of the reasons why I want to be very clear here with folks who are like, well, North Carolina hadn't been good enough at football in a long time. Yes, football pushes the needle, but branding and footprint do just as much. And North Carolina certainly has those things. I mean, ESPN has a whole headquarters not too far away. I mean, that state is major when it comes to the conversation of ESPN, who pays out all this money. Do you feel like North Carolina is a Big Ten or an SEC team in expansion if the wheels totally fall off?
In short, Big Ten. Let me explain. Drake, all along, and let me also, I think it's critical here to remind everyone of Ross Dellinger's reporting back in late March that North Carolina, not Florida State or Clemson, Miami, anyone else, was the linchpin in this whole thing, and perhaps the top pursued ACC school of both the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's kind of mind-boggling for a lot of folks, again, because of what you said about lack of football success at a big national level for North Carolina, as opposed to these other schools, and as opposed to everything that moves the needle within this whole conversation. But like from an SEC standpoint, they want Carolina because they don't have any schools in this state that is SEC territory, basically. And so there's all of these things. But Drake, here's why I have consistently said that I think if we were tiering this thing out, Big Ten is at the top of the tier in terms of what North Carolina would want. Here they are. First off is academics. I'm going to say that even before athletics. North Carolina, as for those of you who watch the great show that Drake and Alex Dono, our buddy and colleague, the host of Locked On Miami, talked about last week, this AAU designation that some schools have and others don't. North Carolina has that. So there's that Big Ten capability.
Nerds.
They profile much more as an academic institution that would fit into the Big Ten above the SEC. Next thing is the varsity sports like landscape across the board. Yes, we're thinking specifically about football and basketball, and everything else falls off after those two. But North Carolina has 28 varsity sports that it supports. The SEC has 21. The Big Ten has the exact same number, 28. So North Carolina, if it went to the SEC, would have to either drop some of those varsity sports, find a different conference for those sports, make it club level, whatever it is. They don't want to do that. A.D. Bubba Cunningham wants to hold on to all these Olympic sports because North Carolina is routinely at the top of the Directors' Cup's rankings, up there with Stanford and things like that. So it's some of those kind of things, Drake. And then, as you well know, and I'm sure your listeners well know, the dollars per institution payout is still bigger for the Big Ten than it is the SEC. So kind of critically, those three reasons I would take, and most North Carolina people would want Big Ten over SEC.
It depends on who you ask. 9 out of 10 dentists will disagree on this subject, and that is where a North Carolina or an NC State or Miami will go in expansion, and whether or not the SEC or Big Ten would take more teams before the Big 12 strikes or the ACC falls apart altogether. Let's talk about the idea of North Carolina falling. I'm going to say it falling to the Big 12 because many call it a lateral move. Now, without Clemson, without FSU, the ACC is below the Big 12, certainly from a revenue standpoint, and the look-in clause would show that with the College Football Playoff Committee. So maybe it's not such a bad thing. Let's see if I can convince you, Isaac, right here on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, and it's every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. If you've seen the Locked On Big 12 Twitter account making very good tweets recently, that was not me. If I was the one in control of it, things would go very south very quickly. Instead, I hired an intern from LinkedIn Talent Solutions. LinkedIn is not just a job board. It helps you fire. No, not fire. Hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else. 70% of LinkedIn users don't use other job sites. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional. They know that you're wearing a lot of hats. I'm wearing a lot of hats. I didn't really want to spend a lot of time making the right hire. So I said, LinkedIn, what do you got for me? Within 48 hours, bam, guys hired, run the Twitter. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Keep in mind that terms and conditions do apply. I think the next step for the Big 12 to stay alive is bringing on a school like North Carolina. I know Miami's in that category too. I mean, it's top of the wish list. Many would say that it's out of the realm of possibility North Carolina would fall to the Big 12, but if the Big 10 and the SEC balk, I can already sense that that's not a move North Carolina fans at least would agree with or want to make. It's not the sexy move in realignment, though the Big 12 certainly wants it. What is the sentiment from the North Carolina side about the school joining the Big 12?
Yeah, I mean, Drake, I think, again, going back to that tiered idea, obviously North Carolina, as a founding member of the ACC, wants to do everything it can to stay in this conference, right? Like It's nostalgic, it's historic, it's on and on and on. It's rolling in the video cart to watch the ACC tournament when you're in elementary school, all of that. That's the ideal. And then I think you go kind of down the tiers, then Big 10, then SEC. And I think Big 12 would be fourth in that, which I don't say as a slight to the Big 12. I say it as just the nature of the landscape.
Money and everything.
Right, exactly. But I think that North Carolina fans, where they would not like that is just, it's not going to be home, right? Yeah. It's not going to be like, because even SEC at least is mostly geographically still kind of home. Right. And so I know you've got a little bit of geography, but most of it. And now that you add the Arizonas and the Utahs and stuff like that, it's expanding even further west, the Big 12 is. And obviously the ACC has as well, with Cal and Stanford and SMU right there in Big 12 country. But I think as North Carolina folks look at it, it's just like, I don't think most of them have even really entertained Big 12 because of, we want to be ACC, but if not, we want to be Big 10 or SEC. Now, that's from a fan base standpoint, from a administration, from a trustee standpoint. I guarantee you they've looked at the Big 12 as a possibility.
The idea that, and somebody out there is balking at this, going, there's no way, there's no chance North Carolina. I mean, Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports put out an article 2 weeks ago that said that Florida State and Clemson could go to the Big 12 in an emergency scenario. Again, I've said this on every show. I think that is impossible. But if you've got really well-connected people at the top saying, hey, don't count this out, anything can happen in realignment. The discussion of North Carolina, the Big 12, is something that at least needs to be had. And that leads me back to the question I asked you earlier about contingency plan and really the life of the ACC. As you look at it now, do you feel as though North Carolina administration is even closer, even more in the weeds of contingency plans than they were when that Magnificent Seven was compiled?
I think they are, for a couple reasons. Number one, we're just further down the road. There's been more time elapsed, and there's not been much positive movement in the ACC. So because of that, you have to think, oh, well, we got to take this more and more seriously. I think another factor in it is these lawsuits continuing to move along and not die off and be quickly fixed and taken care of, right? And so the more time that goes on, I think the more reality there is that either the ACC will at very least be incapacitated to some level, or B, completely fall apart. And if it, in either scenarios, you don't want to be stuck as the last person at the dance, or you don't want to be stuck holding the ticket, or whatever phrase you want to use. And so I think when Carolina folks look at it that way, it's like, well, duh, you're going to go wherever you can go rather than be a big fish in not even a pond, like a puddle.
Right. With that, if Florida State and Clemson do break off, and that seems to be, I think Florida State's a lost cause if the ACC tries to hold on to them. The efforts they've gone through, and now the Attorney General suing the conference, that seems all but done for. Say the settlement number comes out, or there is a settlement, and Clemson says, you know what, we'll back off, we're fine, we'll stay put. Then I could see the ACC definitely staying together. Well, let's say those two big fish are gone. Is it worth North Carolina trying to keep the ACC together?
That's a great question, Drake.
It's tough. It's not easy.
I pause because I haven't really considered it in that way.
Well, and I'll give you a second. I'll give you a filibuster here.
Go.
When Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12, that was the same conversation that a Kansas State or an Oklahoma State, a TCU, a Baylor, a Texas Tech. I mean, those schools are talking about, okay, do we look for a Pac-12 invite? Do we try to wiggle our way into the SEC and take less money? What do we do to stay alive? But I feel like North Carolina, more so than a Texas Tech had with the Big 12, feels as though, look, we're too valuable to continue to get a lot less money in the ACC.
Right. And I think at that point, North Carolina, it's like, because there's going to be other conversations to see, are there any other big fish that would come into the ACC at that point? Mm-hmm. But as we all well know, that's why the ACC went out and got Cal and Stanford and SMU. They don't move the needle in the same way that you need. So for me, if I'm North Carolina at that point, going back to my dancing metaphor, I'd rather just go find a different dance to party at, right? And so whether that is Big 12, who, especially because already the Big 12, the payout per school is greater than the ACC right now. Not as much as SEC or Big 10, but it's still more. If Florida State and Clemson are out the door, that dichotomy that gap grows even greater, right? So there's that side of things. But then also, I think North Carolina feels like, because of what's being said about them as kind of the top of the list, if other schools are out the door before they are, that feels probably like a loss for North Carolina, because it's like, wait, I thought it was us. Why is somebody else gone? But at the same time, if Clemson or Florida State, through their current legal action, finds a way out, it paves a way for North Carolina to go find where they want to go.
Yeah. Isaac, a couple quick hitters here before we really get into the opportunity for North Carolina Big 12 to have some sort of relationship.
Love it.
Why hasn't North Carolina sued the ACC?
It's a great question. There has been no public talk about why that is. Here would be my guess, though, and what I've postulated about it, Drake.
Yeah.
At this point, Clemson and Florida State have already done it. Let's see how this goes. Let them blaze the trail. No need for us to get all tangled up in that unnecessarily, because let's say, let them be the guinea pig. Let them, as Dono said to you the other day, let them be the canary down in the cave, right? And once we see where this goes, then North Carolina either enters into a similar lawsuit or says, oh, that verbiage and language didn't work. Let's try our own verbiage and language. For those who have been, I think another thing is, let's remember North Carolina was tied up in a big legal battle earlier, just about a decade or so ago. Back and forth with the NCAA. They were able to get past that, but it was more on the academic side. And it's like, I think North Carolina, to some extent, there's like, are we really doing this again, getting just all up into the courts? And so I think to some extent, it's, let's just sit idly by, see what happens here, and then we can better determine what the best move is for us.
Isaac, what do we do with NC State?
That's a great question. So a lot of there is actually action going on in the North Carolina legislature right now to try to tie these two schools together, their fates together. So I'm curious to see what happens with that. Actually, some information came out on Friday where there's a bill trying to be passed in the state of North Carolina, to which these two schools would have to play each other every year, and a couple other smaller state schools like App State, some others like that, like on a 3-year cycle, basically. And so I think the North Carolina legislature sees a little bit of what's going on here and is like, oh man, we got to get out ahead of this to kind of protect our state and its schools, and forcing the two biggest public schools, I'm not saying Duke here because it's public schools, to be tied together and still to us, regardless of what happens.
Isaac, I want to go there next. I feel as though the legislature getting involved at UNC with NC State and UNC both, as well as the trajectory of the ACC, it at least puts the window of opportunity there for North Carolina and the Big 12 to have something going on in the future. This is Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm not competitive. I just like to win, and I very seldom lose. And I especially like to win at Monopoly Go on the App Store and Google Play. You played Monopoly, the good old-fashioned Monopoly that I still play, and I think it's very fun. But now I can play it on the go with my friends. I can beat my friends. Look, maybe you're not competitive. Then you can have these unique stickers you can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes. Or maybe you are like me and you want to just beat them into submission. They have hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with as well. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends or for time tournaments where you work together or build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. That sounds very fun. Good, happy, fun time. Hug and hold hands. And there's so much to get involved with at Monopoly Go because it feels exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like Pachinko and Digging for Treasure. There's always something new. New time events. Win big at Monopoly Go. Google Play, the App Store. Game on. It's Monopoly Go. Get off the bench and download it now. Download it now for free. Isaac, I feel as though with the state government involvement in North Carolina and NC State trying to keep them together, as well as Clemson and Florida State vying for a Big Ten or an SEC bid, there are a lot of moving parts at the top of the ACC, and Carolina, as you've mentioned, is waiting a bit. The Canary's in the mine right now, exploring it. And I wouldn't be shocked personally if that leaves North Carolina and the Big 12 in an opportunity to come together. Now, another piece of that is that ESPN is the one who moves these properties around. Let's not kid ourselves. ESPN's the one who makes a lot of these decisions at the very top because they control things. North Carolina sits in the 30 to 40 range in revenue over the last 20 years per the EADA, alongside schools like Oklahoma State and TCU. So it wouldn't be that financially insane to see them in the Big 12. What say you? Would you be shocked if that's how this shakes out in a couple of years, that North Carolina and even North Carolina State both are Big 12 teams?
It wouldn't shock me, Drake, because nothing shocks me anymore, right?
Okay,
between the whole realignment landscape, between the transfer portal landscape.
Oh, wait a second, Isaac. I just got an update. Rutgers and USC are playing in a conference game in November.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's where we're at now. And so the world you and I have to live in is being constantly ready for whatever it is. So because of that, no, it wouldn't shock me. I wouldn't be shocked if we had the new transcontinental Big 16 Hot Daddy Conference sponsored by Dell Industry. Who knows what's going to happen, right? So to that regard, no, it wouldn't shock me at all. And part of it is because of what we said previously about North Carolina sitting idly by from a legal standpoint right now. So what happens if they're hoping for, hey, if the ACC collapses, we want Big 10 or SEC, but because of Clemson and Florida State's proactivity, they get those spots. And then North Carolina's like, all right, Big 12, what up? Here we come, right?
Right.
So here's what I love about it. For example, we've referenced a couple of times the conversation that you and Alex Dono from Locked On Canes had, our great Locked On Miami host last week, and that centers primarily on football. Obviously, for North Carolina, the conversation is going to center primarily on basketball because that is where it makes itself known as a national entity in a big way. Now, yes, a lot of the other non-rev sports, North Carolina is phenomenal at. The women's tennis team is a wagon. The men's golf team is #1 in the nation right now. Field hockey just kills people, that kind of stuff. But with the Big 12, we've talked about it multiple times that in recent history, who is the #1 basketball conference in the nation? The Big 12.
Yeah.
To get North Carolina in there with Kansas, with Arizona now, with Baylor, that has consistently been up at the top of the conference these days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Houston now, like all of that. And then you throw in North Carolina in there. I mean, Drake, no one would touch that ever. And so from that standpoint, it makes a crud ton of sense to me.
I think it's also worth noting again that from a revenue standpoint, the last 2 decades, which is a good federal revenue from athletics, North Carolina is close to an Arizona and again, an Oklahoma State and a TCU. I think from a basketball standpoint, Arizona State, even Arizona fans probably a year ago were thinking, I don't know if I want to join the Big 12, but then wait a second, if basketball is our cash cow here, if that's what's really putting us on the map, then it's okay to do that. And for North Carolina, I am to the point at least where if it's decided that North Carolina and North Carolina State have to go together, it may be the Big 12 that makes the most sense. Because I don't know if I see Petiti and the Big 10 sticking their neck out for an NC State, and the SEC certainly won't. Isaac, with that, is there a way that the money can break the two apart? Or could that be, not to say NC State's a bad program, but it certainly weighs down North Carolina when you compare the two?
Yeah, I mean, because if legally the state is tying these two together,
that's tough.
With all due respect to the Wolfpack, it's going to be like an anchor weighing North Carolina down while they're trying to swim to a different conference, if that's what we get to. And you and I say that with all due respect to our brother Kent. He was getting fed up thinking about this right now because he knows I'm bashing NC State. But it just is what it is from a standpoint of that both state and national recognition. University of North Carolina is the entity, whereas NC State, it just is not, right? And so I think that's where that is. How can North Carolina, if they have to, free themselves not only from the ACC, but from the state at the we'll just say legislative level, tying them to NC State.
Yeah, I think the case with NC State, they sit with BC and Rutgers in the mid-50s in revenue over the last 2 decades. So, right, it sucks that you would say they weigh you down and they're an anchor, but from a revenue standpoint, again, I keep using that word because that's what we have to point to in these conversations. They're there. So, Isaac, with a North Carolina in expansion, I think they're in a great spot from my perspective. When you think about UNC and how much leeway, power, brand prowess, they're way far away from a category like a Boston College who's worried about their future, or Oregon State in their future in college athletics. Where do you see to finish us off North Carolina in controlling its own destiny?
I think that's what makes it such a good spot to be in, when there are multiple conferences who have said they want you. I think that's another part of the reason why you can kind of sit and wait a little bit, because it's like, oh, we've got bargaining power here because y'all already came out and said you want us. So let's hear it. What's the offer in this NIL landscape? Everybody gets that. Like, how let's get into a bidding war here. You want us? What are we talking about? Right. Yeah. Because we've seen so many schools, like SMU has basically said, look, we're not going to take any media shares for X number of years. I can't even remember how it is.
9 years
to the ACC. But I don't think North Carolina would have to make any concessions like that, because they're such a desired commodity. So I do have a good deal of peace of mind. And I would imagine that Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director, and the rest in control at North Carolina do as well.
I'm going to label myself the defense attorney here. I'm standing up for the Big 12 in the conversation. My closing statement would be, for the ACC, revenue is only going down. I am worried the ESPN contract will not be renewed past 2027. Clemson and Florida State both want out. The addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU is not pushing the envelope enough, especially when one of those teams is paying to be there for nearly a decade, whereas a conference like the Big 12 is on the up. Adding an Arizona or a Colorado, adding a Utah, who's a juggernaut in football for the last decade at the very least, or Kyle Whittingham, the Big 12 is in a good spot. And I do not believe if North Carolina ends up, I will say it, falling to the Big 12 past the Big 10 or SEC, that it would be a bad thing for either party. I think it could work. That's Isaac Shade. Isaac, for listeners of Locked On Big 12 who want more of your stuff, and Locked On College Basketball, Jazz, where can they find you?
It's funny also, as you say that, I haven't even thought about this yet, but how about Mac Brown back in the Big 12? That'd be hilarious.
And his old team is not.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's so good.
Because realignment.
Welcome to college sports. Right. Yeah, Drake, for those watching, I'm most active on Twitter at Isaac Shade. That's 1 S, 2 A's in Isaac, and there's a C in Shade. It's German, whatever. And then Locked On Heels as well. I do host both Locked On Tar Heels and co-host Locked On College Basketball. So if you like thinking about college basketball at the national level, make sure to check that out as well.
That's Isaac Shade. He's got great hair. I'm Drake Toll. I have a bad sunburn all around my face. This has been, it always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making these shows your first listen every single day. Tar Heels and Dose Grande.